So Department of Conservation and Recreation, heard of us. 500,000 acres that we're responsible for, and it's a merger of what used to be MDC, Metropolitan District Commission. So stuff around Greater Boston, DEM, Department of Environmental Management, everything out west, all sort of came together. We have a Bureau of Forestry that I'm a part of, and specifically urban and community forestry. Basically what we're here to talk about today. So we'll be going into that in a lot of detail in a little bit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Davis. I work for the City of Worcester. I'm our Sustainability Project Manager in our Department of Sustainability and Resilience, and I'll give you lots of details about one of our exciting projects we worked on over the last year.
Hello, I'm David Getman. I also work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I'm in the Division of Water Supply Protection. So unlike my colleagues here, we are dealing with the source water, where all of the runoff goes into the Wachusett Reservoir. That's what we protect. And I'll be talking more about the importance of the forest and how it relates to water quality, and how changing it to an urban setting can also affect water quality, and measures we can take to mitigate that and result in improved water quality for the communities.
All right, thanks all. This works. Thanks. All right, so I'll hand over to Mathew. Just want to
Yeah, where I can stand here, blocking everybody's view. All right. So a little bit more about our agency. Who has heard of DCR before? A couple people. Yeah, you might think, okay, I've been to a state park, or maybe an ice rink or a swimming pool. We do a lot of different things. So it's conservation and recreation. Like I said, we're typically known as the Department of Everything Else. The state doesn't know what to do with it. They give it to DCR. We plow roads. We are in charge of parkways. We have dams. We have water supply protection. There's forests. There's playgrounds. So it's really beachfront. Revere Beach. There's just so much that happens with DCR. It's kind of fun to be a DCR employee, but then sometimes people come up to you and say, "Hey, can you tell me about the plover over there on the beach?" No, I'm a forester. I have no idea. But we get to work with a lot of great people and really interesting colleagues doing a lot of great work. So again, this is the Bureau of Forestry. There's a bunch of different parts in there. There's a lot of wildfires going on right now. You probably heard about or maybe it's even near your community. The brush fires, things are burning. Luckily, we have we're Bureau of Forest Fire Protection. So they're out there right now. They're out there every day, putting out those fires, keeping people safe. Wood products, you might see later in the spring workshop when we're at UMass Amherst. They're building an entire structure, 4-story building out of wood. So we're locally sourcing lumber. We have working forests. So, everything that we're building, forests are a part of that in terms of wood products. So let's do it in a sustainable way. Let's source it locally instead of getting it, from halfway around the world. What I do specifically is we assist cities and towns. So we're the state. We get lots of money. We have state-funded programs. We have federal-funded programs from the Forest Service. And that comes down to the state level. Every one of the 50 states gets the same amount of money, and we make it available to cities and towns. So you may see some grant projects in your community. Anybody seen like tree planting happening recently? Okay, great. There's a $1.5 billion that was made available for tree planting all around the country. So it's a really big process going on right now, and a lot of cities and towns are taking advantage of that. So we do not just cities and towns, but also nonprofit organizations. We protect, grow, and maintain our trees and forests. There's a lot of different ways we can do that. But when we think about urban forestry, we want to talk about this spectrum here. It's the ecosystem where people live. So it could be rural, it could be that farmhouse way out in the country. It could be the suburbs, or it could be the city. So it's not just urban. That's why we say urban and community forestry. It's not just the densest part of the city. It's any community. It's where trees and people intersect. So we're doing an awful lot. A lot of this is focused on tree planting. The state really stepped up. This was over 10 years ago, and said, we're going to put millions of dollars towards reforestation, towards putting trees back in downtown areas where trees have typically been removed. So we talk about canopy, maurbancanopy.org. I think I gotta leave a pointer here. If you want to check that out. That's where we're actively planting in the 26 gateway cities, and that's sort of mid-sized town population, income, that sort of thing, or who's available for that. But overall, these are the sort of the values that we're hitting on that you'll hear more about: protecting human and natural communities, drinking water, food supplies. There's fruit trees out there as well. Enhancing healthy outdoor recreation, green economy. There's a lot of industry around this, a lot of jobs around this. People that we hire through DCR get trained up and move on and get jobs at cities, towns, private industry, all through the program. Wildlife is important. The municipality, what they're doing there is important. Sequestering and storing carbon is a hot topic now. You'll hear a lot more about that. And climate impact. So it's urban heat island. You've probably heard a lot about that. The canopy, the trees, shade. Trees are just giant air conditioners, right? They're cooling with the direct shade, but they're also transpiring. They're constantly taking up water, moving water through the atmosphere and cooling down the areas. Not just on a micro level, but over the, like we said, that continuum, that spectrum, they're cooling the entire neighborhood. So people ask, well, how do you get this done? We've planted over 40,000 trees in the last 10 years. A lot of trees. Is there a lot of space for trees in some of these urban areas? No. How do you get this done? There's no silver bullet. It's a lot of hard work. It's literally, we're out there pounding the pavement. You're just going door to door. You're hanging up flyers. You're talking to people, and people aren't often engaging with urban forestry because they heard from us. It's because they heard from someone they trust, like a friend, a neighbor. So once we plant a tree at a property and they start talking about it to someone down the street, then we start getting calls on that street. We like to think that when you show up and you knock on the door and say, hey, we're the government, we're here to help, people will talk to you, but that's not always the case, But it's good. We try and meet people where they're at. We have a lot of events. We do things. We, bring out pictures of trees. We talk about where we're going to plant trees, location. It's super important. We call it right tree, right place. So you want to make sure you're planting right trees. People talk about native trees. You look out here. Is there enough space between the trees? Is it far enough away from the building? An awful lot of things to consider, especially in the urban area. So we do a lot of talking. Every tree that we plant, it's a dialogue with the resident. We don't force trees on people. We say, what are you looking for? We can find a tree that matches that. Again, it's a work program. So we put people to work. We hire all the time. When we're full going, we plant in the spring and the fall. We have about 80 employees. Statewide, we have 10 crews running simultaneously, spring and fall. Throughout the summer months, when it's hot, we're watering trees. It's the most important part. Every time we plant a tree, someone signs a watering commitment. If it's the resident, if it's a homeowner, if it's the landlord, if it's the municipality, someone has to be responsible for watering, maintaining that tree. And the best part is if you can find sort of multifamily larger structures, because that one tree is shading multiple different people. So you're lowering not just one energy bill, but you're lowering energy bills for like people all simultaneously. A little bit more bang for the buck. This is another housing authority that we planted in Revere. And it's important to diversify also in age class. So you have old trees, mature trees, the urban setting isn't static. It's always changing. So trees, they die, they need to be removed and new trees need to be planted. So that's what we're trying to do, is keep up on that, keep replacing trees and have a variety of trees, not all planted at the same time, because then the city is like, oh my God, I have to deal with 5,000 trees all at once. Space it out over time. And what we really like to talk about is that this is a legacy. I always kind of like ending with this picture, because we're not planting trees for ourselves, right? We're planting for that next generation. One of these kids here, he's going to be a forester, in 20 years. So we like to show them the opportunities that are out there, promote the fact that trees are good, but they're doing a lot more for you than you might think. If you have questions, check us out. Urban Forestry, just Google DCR Urban Forestry. Tons of information, local ordinances, anything you want to know about your local trees, it's there. Newsletters, information, reach out, send us an email, give us a call. Happy to talk to you. That's it. Thank you.
All right, hi again. I wanted to give a little bit of background on my job and all the exciting things I get to do before I jump into this project. So our department is new. The Department of Sustainability and Resilience was formed in 2021 after we completed our Green Worcester plan. And we've been staffing up since then. I was hired almost 3 years ago, one of the first staff in our department, and I'm a project manager, which means I get to work on a lot of different projects. I'm not necessarily an expert in every one of these things. So when Brittany said, oh, we have experts on forestry, I'm not a forestry expert. I just have a fun job where I get to do a lot of different things. And if anyone has questions about working for local government, it's a great way to make an impact. It can be kind of overwhelming to think, what can I do to help with these huge issues like climate change? And this is a great way to do it. You can make a real impact on a local level and see a difference. It's really a rewarding job. So our Green Worcester plan has 10 chapters on lots of different topics, going from zero waste to energy efficiency to resiliency. So we cover a lot of different things. And this project that I'm going to talk about is focused on resiliency. Does anyone know where this is in Worcester? It's close, yeah. So this is behind our main public library. There's a huge lot behind our public library that is very rarely full. And we wanted to plant some trees there. So there are a lot of big empty lots in Worcester that are obviously contributing to the heat island impact. And in dense urban cities, obviously that's a big issue. So in 2023, we applied for and received a grant from the state. It's called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant. Not sure if anyone's familiar with that, but it's a really great state program that provides funding to municipalities to implement resilience-related projects. And so we received over $400,000 through that grant, and we hired a consulting firm, BSC Group, and then they subcontracted with another firm who's an expert in Milwaukee forest. They're a very specialized type of forest, so we needed experts in that. So we hired them, and then they were on board last December, and then we started this project in the new year. And it was a very accelerated time frame for us. We had to finish the whole project within a year because of the grant cycle. You use it or you lose the money. And we needed that money for this project. So we chose 2 locations for this project as a pilot project to plant these Milwaukee forests. The first one is here. We spent a lot of time trying to decide where should we use this money, where should we plant these forests. We have a GIS specialist in our department, and she did a lot of mapping to overlay where are environmental justice areas in the city, where is the most heat vulnerable areas, the lowest canopy, places that we could make a really big impact. And so this was one of them. And again, using a parking lot that isn't very full is a great way to reuse it. So we ripped up almost 7,000 square feet of pavement here and filled it with trees and shrubs and understory plants. So this was during our planting in the spring. We had over 100 volunteers come out to multiple planting days, people of all ages and abilities. We planted bare root trees, which you can see they basically look like little sticks. They're less expensive to buy, which is one of the main reasons we got them. And they're a great way to get a lot of trees in a dense area. We also have a bunch of shrubs that we placed in. At maturity, this forest will have 60 canopy trees, over 700 shrubs, and over 2,000 understory plants. We did not plant all of those this time, but we did plant the majority of them. We'll do an assessment in the spring and see how well these trees survived their first year, because this was April and May that we planted them. And when you have volunteers planting, sometimes you don't know if they'll survive or not. We had a lot of kids helping, which was awesome. I know that was a theme that other people are sharing, is it's really important for young people to be involved in these projects. And important for us to have the community involved, because the city can only do so much. We can plant these forests, but we want the community to be really invested and have a sense of ownership, that this is where you live, and feel proud of that. And I was just thrilled to see that the community really did care. We had such a positive response to this. Initially, we were concerned because a lot of people don't like it when you take parking spaces away. A lot of people think we need more parking, we need more parking. And of course, as environmentalists, we're like, no, we do not. We need more buses and bike lanes. We need more accessible transportation for more people. But it was a little bit difficult at first to get people on board with getting rid of parking spaces, but we did it. And it's funny because now, like recently, someone said to me, I was walking by and someone said to me, oh, that hasn't always been here. But it just feels like it fits. And you don't even think, oh, we're missing parking spaces. It's just like, oh, this is like a nice green patch where, you know, it makes sense. You're walking along the sidewalk and it is going to look amazing. Right now, the trees are pretty small. But I'll show you a more updated picture. So this was in the spring, our planting days for McGrath. Our second location was at Plumley Village, which is a private apartment complex where lower income folks live. And we wanted to have this pilot be on municipal land and then also private property if we could, to see if it would work. Again, we were like, let's do this pilot year and see what happens. And we were able to find a partner who was interested in doing this with us. And so we did have to sign like an MOU, an agreement with them to make sure that they wouldn't like rip out all the trees and plant a new building there or something, because we were investing a lot of time and money. So this was a fabulous location because you can probably see in the top right, it's right next to the highway 290. And there are a lot of families that live there. You can also see there's a playground there. So there's a bunch of kids and families that are playing right next to the highway. There's a lot of noise and pollution, and it's very hot there too. Again, like right in the center of the city. So this was also a great location. So we turned there's 8,000 or 9,000 square feet of just an open grassy area into this new Milwaukee forest. So the Milwaukee forests are exciting because they're kind of a newer thing around here. We are the first municipality to rip up pavement to put in a Milwaukee forest, and these are the two largest at the time of our building of them in the state, which was really cool to be part of that. There's a couple in Cambridge and Air Devons, and we were able to learn from them about how to install these forests. And they're great because they're these really dense, multi-canopied forests that you're trying to mimic an old growth forest in the middle of a city, which is really hard to do because I'm sure you've heard, like, you know, growing these trees, as the previous woman was saying, 300 years back has an impact on what the trees look like now. So we're trying to create a really fast growing forest to try to mimic these forests that have been around for a long time, to really get the benefits of increasing biodiversity, reducing heat, reducing flooding, improving air quality for people who live downtown. So there's a lot of benefits to them. And the method of Milwaukee forest, it was a man in Japan who created this method. His last name was Milwaukee, so that's where the name comes from. And so we were the third or fourth to do it in the state, and it's kind of spreading, which is really great to see. And we hope to continue to see a spread of these forests. So you can see in just 5 months, I took these pictures last month. You can see the top is what McGrath parking lot looked like. And then you can see the black fenced in area. Some of the trees have already grown that much. And that's just in 5 months. It's already a green space. And then this is a rendering at the bottom from our consultants to predict what the forest can look like at maturity. So 10 plus years from now, you'll be walking by and you'll barely be able to see the buildings, and hopefully it'll be cooler and won't have to worry about as much flooding in the parking lot. And again, I know some students were talking about how it feels to live in places with more trees. It's just a nicer feeling, nicer community. And anytime you're walking down the street and you feel like a little bit of shade when you walk into the sun, you're like, having trees around is just so nice, right? So that's the McGrath, and then the Plumley Village, the apartment complex. You can see it was just a grassy field, and now you can see what it's looking like now, and what it's projected to look like in 10 plus years at maturity. So I just wanted to share too, like this, this is a little summary of what we were able to accomplish in the last year. And if you want to do kind of a deeper dive, we have a story map that has a lot of details about what we did during this project. And you can learn all about that. And then you can always contact me too if you're interested. And of course, I'll take questions. But this was a really fun project to be part of. It's kind of a creative way to add trees into a city that doesn't have much space. I know you were talking about how it can be difficult to plant trees along the right of way. And it's something that we struggle with in Worcester too, but we are going to be investing a lot of money in that as well over the next few years, planting more street trees. This is kind of a creative pilot. Let's see how this goes as we continue to figure out ways to increase our tree canopy. So that's kind of it for me, and I'll pass it along.
Again, hi, I'm Dave Getman with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And I'm going to pivot a little bit because we don't do urban forestry plantings. We're in the water supply business, and our mission is to promote the health of the forests we already have, because those are the initial resources that provide clean drinking water into our streams and wetland systems. Again, what we do is try to preserve this for our future generations. We talked about the urban canopy or the tree canopy, and we talked about uneven age class and the importance of that. And we can see that if you have a forest that is of the same species and the same age class, it's more subject to and more prone to disease, prone to insects. And with climate change, we're seeing more and more of our storm systems having a greater impact, more frequently, more intense. And the forest helps to preserve the environment and the land that's under there. So again, we talked about what tree canopy is. I don't have a lot of pictures, but I want to tell you the importance of the tree canopy. I believe that Matt already talked about the cooling effects, reducing heat. It also has a great importance for air pollution, as we've mentioned, and biodiversity. And it improves the quality of life in those communities. We didn't talk about what the biofilter is. Again, forests provide this filter. They're kind of the sponges that soak up the nutrients from surrounding agriculture sites, from I want to say the stormwater from urban settings. We have a balancing act in water supply. Again, we're fortunate that we have a pristine environment. The forests are not as impacted, but we are starting to see, as we move further west from, again, water supply, as the population grew, we needed to create more water supply, more impoundments to provide water for the metropolitan communities. And as we move further west, we learned the forest is important. Land preservation, land acquisition is what's going to provide the highest quality output of water supply to the water supply. And by the time we actually got out to the Quabbin Reservoir, out in your neck of the woods, we own a significant part of that watershed. And again, the watershed, as I mentioned earlier, in the water section, is that area which provides through runoff into our streams and water and our wetland resources, the water needed for drinking water supply in our case. So the way we measure the importance and the water quality is we are out there sampling our streams. We are doing actual studies of forests that are left intact and ones that have been harvested and managed. And we're noticing that when you remove trees, you end up having higher quantity of water coming off, because you're not having that being the runoff, the stormwater being kind of soaked up by the nutrients, by the forest floor. And again, with that tree canopy, you're having it broken up, so you're not seeing the runoff that's now carrying a lot of sediment load. So again, forests provide best water quality, so we're trying to preserve that. And we have sampling all throughout of our the watershed to kind of measure that and maintain that healthy system. And we've learned that the healthy forest ensures the best protection. Again, we serve 3 million people in the Boston area, so it's important to provide that that these forests remain intact. Another way that we are trying to work with some of these other communities, again, I work out of the Wachusett Reservoir, so Holden, Sterling, West Boylston, Princeton, and Rutland. These are more developed communities, especially here you look around, there's a lot of development people need to live somewhere. So what we're trying to do in these areas, we don't do tree planting, but what we do is we talk about rain gardens. And rain gardens are similar to these tree plantings in the sense that they are collecting that runoff, and holding it and soaking up some of those nutrients and sediments and then slowly releasing them back into the ground. There may be overflows, so they go back into the stormwater system. So another way to protect and kind of simulate the forest is to put in these rain gardens, and they can vary in size and shape and location. But the ultimate goal is providing clean water and a healthy environment for the folks that live in those areas. And I was short, but I think that's what I have. Speaker 4 is going to wrap it up for you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Yeah, a lot of great information. Great to hear from people that are doing the work on the ground. I think we're just going to open it up to questions. For Brittany and I could come up with a bunch, but does anyone have any questions that came up? Yeah. Oh, here, I'll give you a microphone. So
So for the Worcester one, right? In Stafford Street, there's like an empty lot. Have you guys considered it? Like near like CVS?
Yeah, so there are so many places that we would love to put these forests. There are a lot of vacant lots. A lot of them are privately owned. And so we don't always have access to be able to plant on them. We'd love to be an inspiration to some private businesses. Maybe they would want to do something like this. But I'm not sure who owns that lot. The city would probably have to pay to like actually purchase that land, plant on it, unless we could have some sort of agreement with them. So it gets a bit complicated. But I hope, we're hoping that these first 2 forests are really successful and we can use them as an example and hopefully expand to other places. So maybe someday we can plant trees there.
Yeah.
I'd love to fill up a lot of those places with trees and green infrastructure. So
I have
maybe
a
someday.
question.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we like stop people from contaminating our water? So like our natural water, like in streams, because like you know how like it's like connected and stuff like that. Well, I'm not a water expert or anything like that, but like
Well-
how do we like stop the contamination?
But that's a great question. It's a sweeping question too, because contamination comes in many different forms. But how do we stop it? It's through education, like we're doing right now, and getting the message out. What I do in particular is I work with developers. Because we see, like I said, the population's growing and people need to live, and it's very dense in the city, so they move out and become suburban sprawl. So trying to maintain green spaces, trying to educate them on the importance of stormwater runoff, because again, stormwater runoff can transport a lot of contamination of oils, bacteria, salt. That's a big issue right now. More pavement means more roads to plow, and the connectivity is going up. That's the measurement simply of minerals that are out there. Salts, calcium, sodium are the components of that. So it's working with municipalities and getting them to understand the importance of stormwater management.
Okay. I also have a question for the first one. Excuse me. So since you guys assist community, people who like take down trees, like for example, like in their backyard or whatever, what can you do with like the excess branches? Because like I was wondering if like since you guys do playgrounds too, you could like I don't know what it's called. Like they have in the playgrounds like woody chip. Yeah. Like do you guys can do that or
There's a ton of options. And so we have one person who's dedicated to wood products utilization. So you can always look up urban wood use. There's a whole variety. There's people that come out with like what they call a portable sawmill. If the tree's taken down, it can be milled into lumber. Typically, it's turned into something on the site, like picnic tables, benches. So DCR is responsible for the Esplanade. It's the parkway that goes kind of along the Charles River. If you've gone through there, you can see really good examples of wood, kind of tree branches and structures being turned into play structures. It's repurposed urban wood essentially. And I think that's catching on a bit more.
Okay.
So there's a lot of good work being done around that. Also chips, what our wood product person would typically say is highest and best use. A lot of tree waste, quote unquote, branches. People just instantly say, well, run it through the chipper, we'll turn it into chips, but to your point, maybe those branches could be reutilized for something else, like a play structure. What's the highest and best use? Let's not just by default turn everything into wood chips, and just utilize more of the tree for different purposes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. You're all- See what y'all want.
So we're like where we live, there's like they're expanding like Route 20 to be bigger. So I was just wondering like what is really like the impact on the environment on that and how can we like mitigate it or if we're making Route 20 like bigger.
Where do you live?
It's now the Walmart offering, so they're like scanning it to the Route 20, which goes to.
I can answer to that. So again, this goes back to the question that was asked earlier about information. By expanding the road system, you are increasing the opportunity for temperature changes and for stormwater to gain velocity, cause erosion. A way to plan for that is to work with the DPW, municipality doing the work and increase your buffer. The buffer is that vegetation that's between the land use and the resource. So by increasing the buffer, you're probably going to reduce the amount of heat that you release from roads during the summer. You're hopefully increasing biodiversity as well along that border. You can also use during snow events, kind of get them to think about how they address snow removal. We touched upon that earlier about innovative technologies instead of using salt and sand, use brine solution to alter that. It's just as effective, it uses less material, and the outcome so runoff. Not going to impact the value. You have a follow-up to that.
I can add a little bit more too. So at the state level, you have what's called mass general laws, and there's a lot of information out there around what to do in terms of redevelopment, things like that. But because we're a Commonwealth, every city and town has their own local laws, right? And you have an ordinance if it's a city or a bylaw if it's a town. And something that we promote from my office is tree ordinances, like protection, tree bylaws, that cities and towns can put in place to strengthen what's already out there for a mass general law. So some of the stuff that you're talking about happens through your planning board. So maybe there's a whole nother workshop on just how to interface with your city or town, because there's so many layers to it. Is it highway department? Is it planning board? There's a lot of these things that sort of trigger what has to happen. So our recommendation is always work with your tree committee. It's a group of volunteers that work typically with your tree warden. And that's a person appointed in all 351 cities and towns are supposed to have a tree warden that's been in place for over 100 years in this state, believe it or not. And that's the person responsible for public trees. And you can say, okay, hey, private property, you're doing this big redevelopment plan, but that's going to trigger this clause in our bylaw that says you need to plant, X number of trees. So there are studies and there are professionals that can help with that, saying, okay, what's the mitigation? There's a lot of talk about that now. How many trees does it take to offset that increased amount of traffic or that increased amount of impervious. And so getting those rules on the book, it helps everybody. It helps the developers. It's unambiguous. They know exactly what they have to do. If they can't put trees into this certain location, they can pay into a fund, which can then help the city plant its next Milwaukee forest or on the other project. So there are a lot of really good ideas out there. It's not uniform, but that's why you should check with your local government on what they're doing in these situations.
I have a question for Jessica. When you were talking about vacant lots aren't always an option for planting trees because they are sometimes privately owned. It made me think of land trusts for farming. So I'm from Springfield, but we're kind of near Amherst, kind of near Agawam. And so sometimes well, I say we, but I mean, I hear about land trusts where agricultural land is preserved. Is there an equivalent of that for trees?
So we have a great partnership with the Greater Worcester Land Trust. They're a really great organization, very dedicated. And they often call it land hunting. They go hunting to find land that they can buy and preserve. So yes, that's something that they do and try to do. And it would be great if we could someday partner on them being able to acquire some land and plant. I'm not sure in terms of like the difference between agricultural land and planting trees or different forms of green infrastructure. I'm not sure, but I know it's something that they spend time on, and they work collaboratively with Mass Audubon too in Worcester. So definitely working together to figure out any ways we can access that. I also know that I don't know all about them, but there are certain rules about development, like what maybe in the ordinances, like what certain land is designated for. If it's like a commercial property, I'm not sure. I know that in terms of ordinances, we actually as a city are going to go through a process for updating our ordinances now over the next few years, because we just finished our master plan for the city. And we also just finished our first urban forest master plan, which is super exciting. Yes. And we finally have a tree committee that formed last year. So there's, a lot of exciting stuff. And I think working together, we might be able to do some things like that. But yeah, at this point, I'm not sure if that's possible. Yeah.
So I also have a question for Jess. And so you said that you plant trees, and I was wondering if you've ever like tried to or have heard about people planting like green roofs and how that would work, because obviously it's a building, so people own it. So would that be like something that the owner would have to decide on?
Yeah, green roofs are really exciting too. We personally don't have any for city buildings. I know there are some universities in this in Worcester that do have green roofs. We don't have any right now. There's a lot of maintenance considerations, and some of our buildings are older. And during our heat study a couple years ago, I mentioned that we did this heat study with another consultant through Georgia Tech to figure out the most heat vulnerable areas in the city. And that's sometimes how we make decisions on how we do resilience related projects. And they were looking at the health of people who live in these heat vulnerable areas. And they looked at different types of solutions like white roofs. How impactful would it be if we started painting our roofs white, or our roads or our sidewalks, or planting trees? And all of their assessments found that planting trees was the most successful way to reduce heat in these areas of the city. And the green roofs weren't really part of that because there's a lot that goes into them. I don't know that we would do it on a city building. We do have other green infrastructure projects that we work on, like planting rain gardens and bioswales on city property. That's a big thing we're working on right now at our senior center. We also got a grant to do that. looking at other areas that are experiencing flooding. We do have a stormwater master plan process that we're going through over the past 2 years to figure out green infrastructure solutions, nature-based solutions to flooding in the city. So I would love if we did more green roofs. I'm just not sure that it makes sense right now with our building stock.
Another question here?
You all mentioned how you need the importance of educating the public. I was just wondering, how specifically do you do that? Like, do you host workshops or just like go door to door asking people?
So we just wrapped up our fall training, the tree stewards training, Department of Conservation and Recreation. Again, just mass.gov, DCR Urban Forestry. You can find out what we're up to all the time. We have a newsletter. So we're trying to expand that, do more. That focuses around a lot of the topics I just talked about, tree planting, tree care, pruning, helping your city come up with a tree committee, work on tree ordinances. We did mention Springfield. They actually do have a tree protection ordinance for trees of historic size, over a certain size. You have to go to the town, so that there's really good ways to manage that. We do a lot of just, again, door to door. So it's that sort of personal outreach. Our urban foresters are in the city all the time. We work with nonprofit partners. So every time we're in a community, we try and bring grant funding from our Secretariat, Energy and Environmental Affairs, make that funding available. We have like a land trust that we've worked with. There's one in Western Mass. There's one down in Brockton. So they'll get involved. They already have a network of people who are interested. And now with our funding, they can put on tree-related workshops. So even after we plant a city, they'll come through and say, okay, we're going to do a tree walk. And they'll take people to all the different trees that we planted, teach them about the different species, why there's these benefits. So we use a pretty broad variety of ways to interact with people, trying social media posts, videos online is what, so we have a legacy tree program where we get people interested in trees, measuring. We also have a virtual option for that too. So combination of both. So just a few of the things we've been up to.
I want to start working with you on some of those things. We have some limited resource capacity considerations in the city. So we don't currently do things like door knocking and that kind of thing. We do more traditional outreach around social media or flyers or short videos, presenting at committees or events, hosting events, some of that to educate people. Having volunteer events where people come and we teach them about what's going on in the forest, and educate them through that. But it's something we would love to do more on, because one issue that sometimes we can face is when we're trying to plant more street trees, there can be pushback sometimes from residents who don't necessarily want trees in front of their homes. And so we might plant a tree and then have to take it out because someone doesn't want it. And obviously we want to avoid that as much as possible. We have a lot of goals about wanting to plant more trees, and that's, counterproductive to that. So one thing we want to do is spend more time doing things like what you're referring to around door-to-door outreach and connecting more with the community on the benefits of having more street trees too. So it's something we're looking more towards. It's, everything we do is trying to find resources for it and capacity. And I'm hoping as we move forward, we'll be able to get more grants to do things like that.
I also have another question. Have you guys ever considered working with wildlife organizations as trees, and water, stuff like that? It's very useful for wildlife, but since they could give you a much deeper path on what to do and how useful certain things could be for the wildlife. Have you guys ever considered it? Or
I would say for me and my department, somewhat limited so far. I mean, we just did this project. We do collaborate with the Worcester Native Plant Initiative that does have a emphasis on pollinators. And so we did specifically choose some native plants that would attract pollinators in our forest. It's something that we care about, but we don't have specific partnerships yet with types of CBOs that you're talking.
Yeah, we've met with Mass Audubon just around birds and, obviously birds and trees. And, with species that might be better in urban areas. They talk about, birds flying into buildings and windows and like the trees help offset that, so there's a lot of discussions around birds and trees. It's a pretty natural fit in the urban area. Trees and animals. Stay with me, this is hilarious. Lawrence, it's about as dense as it gets. One of the most dense cities, and we've been working there for a while. They have a couple greenways. If you're familiar, there's a Spigot River. It goes kind of right through, but there's buildings everywhere. And we're like, oh, this will be a great place. We'll start planting trees. So we start planting trees, come back, a little bit later. Oh man, someone vandalized these trees. I can't believe it. Down. We get closer and we look at it, and it's got this kind of point like this. Anybody know where I'm going with this? A beaver came out of the river and ate the tree. I'm like, oh my God, we brought the environment back and now it's eating the trees, but that's what the beaver is going to do. So as we, reinvigorate these areas and make them more naturalized, you're going to have the native plants and animals coming back. There are hawks, there are birds, they're coming down and they're getting the squirrels and things. So it is kind of fun to watch the animals come back as the environment is restored. And I believe, you want to talk about foresters for the birds?
Yeah, I mean, forestry obviously is increasing biodiversity for, the wildlife community and birds. We have a natural resource section within the Division of Water Supply Protection, and and their job is to inventory all of our properties, convert field to meadows, and to introduce biodiversity, pollinators, because we know how important they are. Again, we're focused on our property, not necessarily reaching out to the broader community, because we're managing our lands. But we hope that our lands are an example of what everyone can achieve and strive to. So by putting these in and in open, public spaces, I think people, we also, when we do these projects, an important thing you talk about outreach is signage and an explanation of what the importance of this is. And maybe even an illustration of what this looked like before and what we're trying to achieve. And usually when you put up signage, it generates questions and interest in high traffic areas. But to speak to wildlife, yeah, it's important to get people to understand how forests play such a vital role.
I learned recently that in order to see an eastern gray squirrel back like 100+ years ago, you had to drive miles and miles outside of a city. They're nowhere to be found. And only just recently they started doing counts of gray squirrels in Central Park in New York City to try and get a count of how many are there. Thousands of them now. But before they started planting trees and creating parks, you couldn't find them. So just interesting, I think, like we take for granted, right, using this common wildlife.
I was wondering how like college and jobs and like how old you have to be, do you have a specific training?
Which jobs?
Any of them,
So it depends on what, like, if you wanted to work for a municipality, it depends on the type of job. Often you need a high school degree, or equivalent. Depending on the type of job, you might need, higher education. If you want to do something like working in the forestry department, you might just need a high school degree. And some of them are very entry level, so you can go in and just learn a lot, which is just really good experience. For my job, I needed to have many years of experience and an additional degree. But again, it depends on the department and the work that you'd like to do.
Yeah, we hire the whole spectrum. We have seasonal, it's a seasonal, work that we do spring and fall. Typically those 3 months in the spring and fall, it's very, very heavy for our work process. So we have short-term labor positions and no requirement. You just have to apply. You can work for just the one season, you can work for both seasons. Then it goes up a notch. There's a long-term labor position, and that's you actually get union benefits. You get recalled back. You can work about 10 months out of the year. You take a break and you come back the next season. Then you start getting the full-time positions where we have like foresters. We have a whole bunch of people. It takes a whole lot to get these programs done. We have accountants, geographic information system, computer specialists, HR people. So there's a whole range of jobs behind this green industry, so to speak. So again, if you're interested, get in at the ground level. It's a career ladder, and we really work to teach people and show you what the industry is and where you can go from here. And it just takes off in a whole bunch of different directions because the path could lead you anywhere.
And I just wanted to add too, before I pass it over, how important it can be to just connect in the community. If you're interested in a career in one of these fields, volunteering where you can meet people who are doing this kind of work or joining committees. I know someone mentioned that in the previous session too. That's a great way to meet people and see what their jobs are and make connections and see what's available. But I did a lot of volunteering when I was right out of school, and I found that to be a great way to meet people and learn about types of jobs that are out there and how to apply for things. And it's a great way to do that. So.
And I'd like to add to that as well. What we do is we have internships. We have unpaid and paid internships, and they vary from skill levels and projects. In our water quality section, in the quality water supply, we will bring students on to do field work with us, go out and collect samples, bring them back, work on data collection and data management if you have that skill set. As far as volunteering, like you said about getting on a committee, your local conservation commission is a great way to get your foot in the door to learn about your community and some of the projects go on. You can be an associate if they allow students to come on, or even just going and just again volunteering and being present gets you. It opens your mind and opens your door to the possibilities. As Matt said, we're a very interdisciplinary organization. We cover a lot of many different topics. We talked about seasonal jobs and how those can build to a permanent job in place. I started my career volunteering at a conservation commission, and we did an inventory map of their properties. It was my project when I was in college, and that led me to where I am now. And I've been in this job for over 35 years, and I can honestly say I enjoy and love every day that I'm there. The environmental field is wide open. As long as there are people on the planet, there's going to be an environmental issue that we need to tackle.
I want to add one other thing because you both have said it. We also have seasonal jobs. It's just not in my department, but in our forestry and parks department, there are a lot of students that will work in the summer on certain projects, like helping planting trees. And then some of them will graduate and then be hired full time. So if you're interested in that, that's also a possibility in the city. It's just not in my department. So yeah.
I just wanted to add, you can go to Mass Careers, and when you go in there, you can all the state jobs are there, and that's where you may find your seasonal jobs, maybe internships. Again, starting at this level, the pay is not great, but it's all about exposure and getting your foot in the door and opening up the possibilities that are out there. So again, I believe it's Mass Careers. You can even select the particular field in your own town.
Also, like Civilian Conservation Corps, and we're calling it the Climate Conservation Corps here for DCR. So kind of do sort of seasonal projects, kind of rail planting trees, all these projects. Yeah.
Yeah, so I live on the airport, like I live near it, I can walk up there in 5 minutes. And we have kind of like a small forest that leads into a bigger forest. So in the smaller forest, our neighborhood usually puts our leaves there or like branches and other stuff. I was wondering if that's like okay for the environment, and if it's like if we're putting too much and it's not decomposing as fast, or is it okay for the animals to have like more of the leaves for the habitat and general stuff like that.
The short answer is yes. You know, leaving that debris, which we call slash when you're doing a forestry operation, we require some of that to be on the ground, but it's a balancing act. Especially now, given drought conditions and climate change, we're seeing longer periods of drought, we're seeing increased temperatures. So that can also function as a forest fuel, which, as was mentioned earlier, you're out there trying to now suppress these fires. We're seeing more and more. We're in a red flag status right now. So leaving that material on the ground has benefit, but also depending on climate situation, it can lead to other problems. But by and large, leaving that material there is fine. You don't want to deposit a whole bunch of material next to a resource, because that can, you know, decomposition or, you know, the biomass could have some impact on it.
This is also. When we're done eating some food, like if we're making applesauce, we'll take the apple remnants and throw it outside. Is that okay? Because I know it can attract bigger animals that shouldn't be there specifically, but is it okay from time to time?
We call that random compost. So ideally, you know, you'd want to put it in, you know, so you can actually get the benefit from that waste product. But as far as just randomly tossing it into the woods, I don't know if you could technically call that littering, but it does provide food for some animals. It also can be, you know, toxic to others. So I'm not a biologist, but you know, just from my life experience, spreading that out should not be a problem. You don't want to toss it into a stream or, you know, a water course, but yeah, it has benefit, but you don't want to do a large volume. If you start dumping a lot there, then it's going to have, you know, nutrient impact. You can have animals come out and eat and defecate, and now you've created another pathway for impact.
Thank you.
I'll just speak to that real quick. Urban orchards. We're talking about urban forestry. A lot of people ask, what about apple trees? What about fruit trees? What about an urban orchard? Great idea if you're ready to maintain it. It's like a puppy. It's a lot of work. All right. Make sure you sign up for the long haul. So we've had plenty of schools create urban orchards and then not maintain them. And then all the fruit falls down on the ground. Like I said, in the middle, all the rodents start coming out. People say, oh, it's attracting all these rats. Well, no one's maintaining, no one's cleaning up, no one's harvesting, you know, so you have to have a long-term plan. You have to have maintenance. Lots of buy-in. So great ideas in the right places, but also because it's urban, you know, there's lots of people around, there's also lots of impact. And you may be doing one thing, but you're impacting several other people who weren't a part of the process. So it's a discussion and just needs a lot of planning. So a bit of a balance, you know, with all this, and, you know, we'll see how it all goes years from now. Because sometimes, you know, you see these great Milwaukee forest ideas, and it makes me think of areas that I've already seen that just came up because, you know, it was a Norway maple stand off to the side, and then, you know, forestry department came in and levels the place because, well, the police didn't like it because, you know, it was a screen, and, you know, so there's a lot of balancing to be done in the urban forest. There's a lot of competing interests, and we all just kind of have to find that equilibrium where we can make it work for everyone for the betterment of all, because that's really the point behind our urban community forestry program.
Yeah, so I know food waste isn't a focus here, but we'll plug Mass DEP. They sometimes have composting programs. Local cities and towns sometimes can give you compost bins. So definitely prefer that to recycle our food waste rather than throwing it out where we can.
What makes a Milwaukee forest? Like, what's
So they're multi-canopied, so you're planting a lot of different types of trees, native plants, being thoughtful. I know that you had mentioned too, like you don't want all of the same types of trees, then they're susceptible to diseases. And very dense, so you're planting the trees very close together. They compete for the sunlight, so they grow quickly. They're between 1,000 and 10,000 square feet. They're small. And their maintenance is needed for the first 3 ish years. And then after that, they're kind of self-sustaining, compared to other types of trees where if you're planting along the street, you need to, be mindful about like watering and trimming so they're not too close to power lines, or thinking about how their roots might be impacting accessibility for people using wheelchairs on sidewalks or things like that. So this is just like super dense rather than spreading out the trees. The types of trees are very intentional, and they grow quickly because they're competing for resources. They don't need a lot of inputs over time. General concept.
Questions?
Hi, so I was just wondering what like other challenges you guys may face with implementing greener infrastructure, such as like planting trees or implementing bike lanes or electrification of vehicles, and if there would be like a set like deadline for these specific projects.
We have goals for when we'd like to accomplish a lot of these types of things. So we'd like to have a lot more EV charging stations in the city. We installed, we now have around 30, I believe 30 public. We installed 18 new stations over the last couple of years, something we really care about. Right now, there are some supply chain issues with actually purchasing EVs. So we were kind of hoping there would be more of an uptake of them. They are a bit expensive for some people, although there are incentives. So the city has a couple EVs and we're trying to bring them more into our fleets. Also trying to be creative about other ways we can electrify equipment. So we just purchased a couple of lawn mowers that are electric, and we were able to get incentives for those. And our DPW really loves those. They're like nice and quiet and fast. And so try to be creative around electrification. Do you want to add to that? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the community I live in, we have converted all of our power to electric. You need multiple batteries. You need to be stacking. Because they do eat up a lot of batteries, but you need a large area or if you like the gas here to get on. Another thing is, no mow may, so implement some kind of strategy to reduce mowing. That's ideal. That lawn that is done by mow medium to in a watershed. Electric is like I said, it's challenging with the number.
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges with that. There's capacity in the grid. Where can we install charging stations? That's a big part of it. We need people to purchase them, make that accessible. Then we need them to be able to charge them. But we do have goals of installing more charging stations and electrifying our fleet. In terms of green infrastructure, it's something we're working on. There's always funding that we are applying for grants and looking for funding for those things. I think we've talked a little bit about trade-offs of where you're placing different projects and working collaboratively across departments, because there can be competing interests. I mentioned like we want our sidewalks to be accessible. And so that means we have to be careful about or intentional about the kind of trees that we plant. We just completed a mobility action plan in the city, and part of that is to install more bike lanes. We're testing that out in certain areas of the city. Part of that is there can be a challenge with culture. So getting people who aren't used to things like bike lanes to be kind of on board with that can be difficult, because sometimes that does mean, like I mentioned, parking, right? You might have to remove some parking to have enough space to add bike paths along a road. And so that's something to consider, is how the public feels about certain issues, and getting the public on board is really important to have that community support. So we have a lot of goals for these things. I don't know that really there's a deadline, but we're hoping to achieve some of these things over the next 10, 15 years. And there are all sorts of challenges to getting there. Yes.
The state does have deadlines. We have a 2050 carbon neutral goal. So they've been building and working towards that, benchmarks reached by 2030, and then by 2050 be net neutral. So a lot of the conversion you just talked about, and other laws that are being put in place, like new construction now as a minimum LEED certified silver, for projects over a certain size. So there's a lot being done with laws around trying to reach those goals in time, to reach that 2050 sort of goal. And, we kind of bake it into the work that we're doing along the way to promote more green infrastructure, stormwater management, electrification.
Well, thank you so much. That's our time. That was amazing. And I hope that you all got so many nuggets for your current issue with like their start thinking. Please give everyone a round of applause. You'll be around, right? If you want questions. Great.
A large virtual. Sorry.
Speak on behalf of my family. We
said no, May.
And we see a lot of people behind.
Said no, May.
You know, this guy should have for us.
So in Springfield, you're gonna have a double lot.
Can I get my house in the course to the.
Because go to the end, go right to the, yeah, go right to the end.